perhaps it's quite it's quite
aromatic, oaky, with an undertone of a mother's smile on a warm spring day.
yeah, those things, etc. Big words, chummy banter.
Someone's got the cheese fix again.
This is really uncomfortable. My first instinct for anything that I've been asked to do is to say no. Apart from the fact that I've made a art form out of being lazy, I don't like changing things up. I mean, I'm a musician at heart, and the whole point, the job description of being a musician is to indulge in endless, ceaseless repetition. You have to do the same thing again and again, again and again, and again and again, irrespective of how you feel, irrespective of what's going on around you, and you have to land in the same coordinates every time. This idea that you're supposed to constantly be the same thing again and again, it's an impossible task. It seems like this forum is an apt place to overshare. So I started out thinking about repetition and thinking about the idea that even if everything is changing all around us, we need to somehow be in the space that I can center myself and I can land in the same spot. Now, it's an impossible task, but then if that's the job, and if that's the job that you have to pull off, you want to somehow land in that space, right? Music and sound has the ability to somehow center me. Music and sound has the ability to somehow take you back to a moment that you experienced earlier and somehow make sense of the soundtrack that's running in your mind right now. So it's 1992, and I'm in Agartala. And just like everybody else in Agartala, I'm dreaming of not being in Agartala. Yeah, I mean, God bless the place. I'm sure it's a great spot to be in now. But man, it was a miserable place in 1992. There was nothing to do over there. And I remember one afternoon I was fooling around in my house. And I saw that the music system had been left on, right? This was a deck that my dad had built using some spare parts from here and there. And it had an amplifier connected to it. I didn't notice that the amplifier was on. And lights were on. I went and I hit play, and I heard, and it was super loud. It was so loud that I stopped it immediately. You know, I mean, I was freaked out that my mom is going to come and like tell me like, what are you doing? But I noticed something. Like that sound, like it felt like it was hanging in the air for just a little while longer. And it had covered me, and my heart was racing, much like it's racing right now. It happens every time I hear that first chord. And then I hit rewind. These were cassettes. You had to wait for a second for the moment to happen again. And I hit rewind, and I hit play again.
It's been a hard day's night, and I've been working like a dog.
And I had this, I couldn't explain it. It just felt like I have around me these things happening, like the air was moving. And everything made, I'm going to use a cliche, everything made sense all of a sudden. And then I looked around me and the moment had vanished and it had evaporated. And then nothing made sense all over again. And the only thing that I had left from that moment was I have to figure this out. So I started. Like there was nothing to do in Agartala, right? But my dad, being in the army, there was a Fauji band. And I picked up the drums, I picked up the guitar, and I started playing. And every time I would change a chord on time, every time I would get to another chord on time, it's like I felt this sense of accomplishment. And I felt this joy. And everything was making sense. These are great times. 1994, we moved to Delhi. And life's a little better now. Because everybody around me is playing music. But you see, when you're by yourself and when you're on your own, you can make sense of anything. School life's getting over, and I'm at a spot now where you're given that question, right? That do you want to do something with your life, or do you want to do something that you love for the rest of your life? And I guess that's economics 101, but like my mind went into the space of needs and wants. And I refused. The first instance when you're supposed to make a decision and then stick with it, that uncomfortable feeling of choosing something that I was not prepared to do, I resisted the urge to just pick a line that somebody else had chosen, and that somebody else could have been my parents, could have been society, whatever. I mean, this is the late 90s, right? There are two choices. Either you become a doctor or an engineer. There's nothing else. But I figured that music and sound is something that is making sense. So I got together with a few of my mates, and we put a band together. But instead of playing the popular hits, I remember my first gig. It was 2001. We played 90 minutes, instrumental music, all original, and we sounded like shit. It was the longest 90 minutes I've spent on stage. A close second to that is the 18 minutes I'm going to spend over here. But those 90 minutes, as horrible as we sounded like ourselves. And that moment of picking to do something which is truly not cool, play your own stuff. That moment led me to figure myself out a little bit more, and I realized, I quit the band obviously because we sounded like shit. I mean, you're not going to be on board a sinking ship, right? But what I did figure out was that if I wanted to play music, if I wanted to make sound, I needed to figure out what sound was made up of. I found myself in Chennai, in sound school, and I was surrounded by people who had the same intent, who had the same pursuit in mind. But something really interesting happened over here. Something really interesting happened that I noticed that in all of my friends and colleagues, everybody had had their Agartala moment. The shocking thing was, it was not to do with the Beatles. Everybody reacted to sound once in their own way, and it changed them forever, and they found their path, and our paths collided. I was one of the lucky ones. I was there at a time when I was probably one of the few guitar players, so I ended up playing for a lot of other people's projects. And what ended up happening was that I realized that stuff that sounded okay to me, stuff that sounded good to me, did not sound good to other people. Everyone was hearing differently. And why were people pretending to like the same kind of music? This sound school situation gets over, and the same thing takes over again. You see, when you start out as being a musician, the initial joy of playing the instrument is robbed when you hear somebody else play, because then the comparison and the competition kicks in. You want to sound like your heroes, and you want to sound better than the people who are playing next to you. It's not about stealing someone else's gig, but it's about competing. That spirit, that competition, it's there. Nobody acknowledges it. And the same thing starts happening in production. Productions are being compared. You're competing on mixes. And then you have client expectation that I don't care how you feel, it's supposed to sound like this. All of this makes you think twice about the line that you've chosen. Because, and I guess this is the repeating theme, I was playing with this band called Artists Unlimited. I recorded an album with them. We did tours, fantastic band. And right after the album launch tour got over, I quit. Then Ed Phillip, who started the band, ended up moving to Berkeley and starting the Berkeley India Ensemble. I quit because while playing the instrument, you're constantly trying to recreate this feeling of you being in your room and you're practicing your instrument. The uncool music that I was talking about while I was in school was the blues. You know, my forefathers never picked cotton, but there is something in a simple blues song that just cuts through my heart. And I started a blues quintet with a few friends of mine. All of them have gone on to be attached to music in some way or the other. The band was getting comfortable. The band was doing a lot of shows. We were popular. Minor hotshot guitar player in a certain pin code of a certain town. I was pretty good. I was pretty famous, well known, right? But then every time I got on stage, it just felt fake. It just felt fake because it felt like I was again parroting emotions. So it can't be about this. I took a drastic step. I just stopped playing guitar. I was like, either I tell the truth or I stop talking. So this was about 21 years ago. And I lucked out. My partners in crime, Abhishek Mathur, Maninder Bose, Chayan, Ujjwal, Aman, a couple of ex-members, Sohail and Mohit, all of us had the same idea. All of us had the same idea that doesn't matter how you feel, doesn't matter how uncomfortable you are with your idea not getting accepted, you have to serve a song. We ended up doing a couple of albums. My guess is north of 500 shows. You stop counting. The band's doing pretty well. It's around middle part of the previous decade. And that same feeling of, well, not as aggressive as lying to yourself, but withholding the truth. Because here's the problem. All of us crave a certain amount of appreciation, acknowledgement, and success. The problem is when you get it, then you're supposed to repeat the same thing again and again. We ended up writing a bunch of tunes. Those tunes made it to a couple of albums, won a few awards. But see, now, from being that kid who played 90 minutes of original music with the single intent of, we'll see what happens on stage, but we know this is our starting point. We end up making songs that we're supposed to present and that we're supposed to repeat time after time, every gig, because now the song doesn't belong to you. The sound doesn't belong to you. It's somebody else's Agartala moment. It's somebody else's moment. It's the soundtrack to somebody else's life. As much as I love that kind of acknowledgement and love that kind of pressure, it's a little disturbing. Because the entire point of this creative exercise, the entire point of figuring out what you want to do with music and with sound is that you have to figure out your contour in it. So I opened up my guitar again. Now it's been about 6 years I've not played. Advaita, I'm playing bass. And I started noodling again. We were on a break. I was fine. Immediately sounds started coming out. But the thing is, every time the sounds came out, it just felt like different personalities. That initial urge and that constant urge to figure out what it is that you want to sound like. What it is that do you want the people to hear you as. This doesn't make sense. So I'm doing my sketches. I'm writing my tunes. It's not going anywhere. At least I'm playing guitar. Life has taken another turn, right? Got married. So my wife, who's here today, she did this thing of introducing our son to art. Gave him a bunch of paints. He's 3 years old at this point. Gave him a bunch of paints and said, make anything you want. There's no boundary. The only boundary is the frame. Don't paint on the walls, but make anything you want. The only condition is you should be able to explain it. Imagine that. Here is a 40-something guy who can't explain what he's doing, but we have generously put that pressure on a 3-year-old kid. So I'm in my studio. I'm working and I get this message. And it's my son's first painting. And I'm like, yeah, this is great. I mean, it looked like nothing, but it was great. Like it had this energy coming off the canvas, right? And I got back home that day and we were sitting, it's dinner time. And I asked him, man, that was good. That's how I talk to him. I do, yeah. And I said, man, that was good, but what is it about? And he looked up and he said, and he's like, it's a dirt machine. And you know that moment in Ratatouille, in the end, when he takes that bite and everything goes back and makes sense? That moment happened. And that moment, when he said it's the dirt machine, just made me feel as if everything that I had been doing up that time, up till that point on the guitar, had this one contour. It's amazing that once it has a name, it begins to make sense. And if that's the crush that I needed, then it's fine. Immediately, all the tunes that I'd been working on started to make sense. They had this grimy, sandpapery, unfiltered, unapologetic, I don't give a to it. And that's it. Starting from there, I sat down and I made a couple of changes to the ideas that I was working on. And with those changes, I managed to release an EP. One thing that it did was that I realized that I am not in this gig to become a better guitar player. That's a competitive spirit. I'm not in this gig to become a better musician because there is only one truth. You're a better musician today than what you were yesterday. And if you make it through one more day, you're going to be better tomorrow. This idea that everybody is listening to a piece of music with the baggage of their biases, their nostalgia, their emotions, whether they had water that morning or didn't get enough sleep, that is something you can't control. But great sound bypasses all of that because you as the first listener sat down and heard it with one simple question to answer. What does it feel like? It's the same question that I ask when I'm given the privilege to teach. My students are posed with that question, that what does this feel like to you? Every other thing is textbook. Every other thing can be learnt. Every other thing can be, dare I say, copied. But what the most important thing and what that does, when you try and answer that question, is it starts the process of you Shawshanking your way through these walls that hold back what you want to say, and you have the tiniest of hammers, and it takes days, weeks, months, years, a lifetime. But you start chipping away at it. And as you chip away at it, slowly and slowly, and through all the layers of shit, now I've said it, through all the layers of shit, which is all of your emotional baggage, which is all of your emotional expectation that you wanted to sound like that, you wanted to sound better than those peers, you wanted to sound better than those competitors, you wanted to get close to the way your heroes sound. Once you get past all of that, the only thing that lies suspended in the air right in front of you, screaming for your attention, is what you feel like. Once you have this question at the base of your pursuit, the job is really simple. The job is really simple, and I'm going to paraphrase one of my favorite authors, which is Mary Oliver. The job is just to pay attention. But not to pay attention to what's happening around you, but to pay attention to what's happening here. It's a very dark space to enter. Because it's not going to reward you just because you had the thought that you should suddenly start paying attention to the way that you feel. That lies layers and layers and layers under. The same thing applies when people want to make music. I have the privilege of producing music for others. I don't think it's a tough thing to write a song. I don't think so at all. One of my favorite sayings is what the Germans have, that there is no bad weather, there's only inappropriate clothing. And in that spirit, there's no bad song. There's no bad sound. There is only the inappropriate dressing of that sound. Because I feel there is only one job. You have to constantly put yourself in a spot where you have to ask yourself the uncomfortable questions. And the uncomfortable questions have no right answers. They have no right answers because here's the best part. You will change. It's going to be different tomorrow. And if you're on this journey with somebody else, they will change. And maybe the paths will never collide. Maybe the paths will never cross. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. Because at that point, and I'm sure everybody's well-wishers and everybody's parents have told them this at least once in their life, that lie to whoever you want, but don't lie to yourself. It sounds easier said than done, but the job is to have this constant North Star in front of you. The job is to constantly keep asking yourself that what is it supposed to make you feel like? In this pursuit, the daunting thought is that all of your life behind you is sunk cost. All of your experiences in the past are meaningless. Because if you're going to rely on what we felt, then we'll always have the crutch of a good memory. Then we'll always have the crutch of something by which we can justify our next move. And the only job we have is to create something which makes sense in the present moment, and it hangs in the air for somebody, somewhere, who's going to have another pillar moment.